Hey everyone, thanks for your patience. I just wanted to say hello again. My name is Jason Epping. I'm the curator of digital media here at the Museum of the Moving Image. And I just want to thank you for spending your weekend out here in Queens. It's been really lovely to have all of you out here for what I think... Yeah, Queens. It's been really lovely to have all of you out. I think it's been a great conference, and I think you'll all agree. I hope you had a chance to check out the museum. If you did or if you didn't, I hope you can come back and join us. We have lots of film screenings and programs and exhibitions that address the moving image in many of its forms. I'm going to introduce... I also want to thank the Theorizing the Web committee. It's been a real pleasure working with them. Really generous and very kind, and they put something together I think is really special, and I think that really shows in the last 2 days that we've been here. So I'm going to introduce the co-founder and chair, Nathan Jerk Chicken.
No. Okay. Thank you everybody for coming. This has been an amazing conference. I'll say the same thing that I said last night, and I really did mean it. It's not hyperbole. No one has treated Theorizing the Web as well as the Museum of the Moving Image has. It's been an absolute pleasure. So a big round of applause to the museum. And specifically, Jason Epping. Yeah, I didn't know his real name. Yeah. I was the bigger guy. I was the bigger person using your real name. And Jason presented last year at Theorizing the Web and approached me about doing the event here, and it was obviously the right decision to come here. So again, thank you, Jason. A special round of applause for Jason. You don't know how much work he's done. I want to thank all of the volunteers. We have people who just volunteered out of the goodness of their hearts to help out in so many different ways. So any volunteers, stand up. A round of applause for volunteers. Stand up if you're a volunteer. Get back. Thank you. And a volunteer who's done, I really want to point out, is Jolly back there doing the live streaming. You're here, so maybe you haven't watched the live streams, but they're so good. I don't know if you've seen on the Twitter feed like how good they are. They are, J.J. Abrams, eat your heart out. They are like, oh my God. So sorry to make you clap a bunch of times, but Jolly's done such amazing work, so big round of applause. And now I want to bring up the committee. This is the Theorizing the Web Organizing Committee, and come up on stage. I want everybody to give another round of applause to the committee who's done so much work this year to make the event happen. Come on up, come on up. Are we gonna do a picture? Hang on. Keep clapping. So over there we have Jeremy Antley. He's our treasurer, and Whitney, you've probably talked to her. Whitney Aaron Basil, you've talked to her on email, I'm sure. David Banks is over there, who's done so much work this year. PJ Ray is also the co-founder. PJ and I started this conference. Tanya Lockhart. April Williams, first year on the committee, and Jenny Davis. One more round of applause for the committee. You guys. Thank you. Okay. And then the committee would like to thank all of the presenters and moderators who have presented work this year. It's kind of funny. We don't set a theme for the conference every year, and sometimes themes emerge. And this year really did seem that sort of intimacy and sexuality and touch and romance and closeness through screens, including with bots and artificial intelligence, kind of emerged as a theme this year that we didn't totally see coming. I thought that was really cool. And last, I want to thank all of you for coming, everybody on the live stream who's watching from afar. This only happens because you all come and care. And it's been, I think somebody tweeted that when people first walked into session rooms yesterday, everybody smiled. The moment you walked in the room, there's like a smile, and that's been the vibe. Like, we're all in this together. Like, everybody's on the organizing committee. That's kind of always, theorizing the web doesn't exist because it needs to. Like, right, it's not an institution that is getting, that has to exist for any particular reason other than we wake up in the morning thinking about, like, technology and identity. That's the first thought. Like, we're nerds. Like, we're in this conversation in good faith, and there's no other reason why we're here than for that. So I appreciate the vibe and the community here. And with that, I want to bring up the third keynote panel. We have 2 more keynotes tonight. So I'm going to bring up David, our moderator, and the rest of the panel. Come on up. And David, I'll hand it off to you here. Thank you, everyone.
Hi everyone. This is gonna be a lot of fun. Okay, so we're going to let's see. This panel. What's this panel about? Cool stories. Cool. So we've got. So what I'm gonna do, since you've all clapped a lot, I'm gonna give you a little bit of a break. I'm gonna read something, and then I'll introduce our panel, and then at the end of the introductions, then you can clap. So get your hand cream out, revive yourselves. It'll be perfect. Okay. So the web is not only a new mode of conveyance for stories, it is a new character, a new setting, and a new gatekeeper for whose stories get told and heard. The web forces us to reconsider, and I've read this before, but I can't really find the actual attribution, so this is not my idea. But I also don't know whose it is, that canons and who gets to contribute to canons is really a matter of political economy, because what really ends up happening is you either have powerful, mostly white men who get to make remakes, and everyone else is fanfic. And so what we have here is devices, apps, and services have solved many of the day-to-day challenges that were once the bread and butter of story writers. Stories are one of our first technologies, and they are means of collective memory storage that propel ideas forward in time and outward to new communities. Stories not only tell us what has been, they also help us imagine what could be. So I want to also keep everyone in the room honest, so these kinds of conversations usually veer hard into, media's dying, like new institutions are coming up, some are dying, some are coming, and we instead of an hour and a half talking about Medium, I think what we really want to do is keep track and talk about specifically what the exploring how the web changes stories and how we tell them. So now, starting at the opposite end, we have Jenna Wortham, is a staff writer for the New York Times Magazine, among other things. And then we have Alej Kott, is a writer, director, and producer who creates stories for television, film, comics, prose, poetry, video games, and the internet. He plans to invent a new art form before he's 50 years of age, believes in poetry, and has the scars to prove it, lives in Los Angeles and Brooklyn. We have Alexandra Kleeman, is a writer in residence at Bard College and author of the novel You Too Can Have a Body Like Mine. Her writing has appeared in the Paris Review, Zoetrope, Harper's, Elle, and N+1. Intimations, a story collection, is out from Harper in September 2016. And finally, we have Laurie Penny, is a journalist and author from London. She writes about social justice, feminism, technology, and culture, and is a contributing editor and columnist at New Statesman. She has a 2015 Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. Her latest book is Unspeakable Things, Sex, Lies, and Revolution. So now I am going to turn it over to Jenna, who will give us some words.
Hello? Okay, great. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit today about my evolution as a journalist because I come from a very traditional print background, and basically in the last 18 months, my entire world has exploded just because there's so many more ways to make things, and there's so many more ways beyond text to make things, which I guess sounds silly to say out loud, but it hasn't always been available or accessible to me. When I started out my career, I thought the end goal would be, to write stories that end up on the front page of the New York Times, and then it's kind of become available to me that there's so many more options. And I guess I had this sort of, oh, it got louder, cool. I guess I had this moment a few years ago when I came to the Times and I was pretty young, about 25, and I was writing for the newspaper. And at one point, I was writing stories for the front page, I was writing stories for the web, and so we still differentiated in this way. And I remember I had a story that I was so proud of that went on the front page of the New York Times, and someone tweeted at me on Twitter, and they were like, "I love that blog post." And I was like, "Wait, but this was, an A1 story that like everyone around the world saw." And I think it was this really humbling moment where I kind of realized that, readers don't care where stuff comes from. They just want it to be good and interesting and relevant to their lives. And I think that, for me, was a really illustrative moment where I realized that if I wanted to sort of think of myself as more of, I guess, a storyteller or someone who had relevance beyond thinking about boxes where things go, I really had to expand how I thought about what I was making and why. And that was really exciting because I love writing and I love being a journalist, but I also just love a creative process. So I started kind of casting around to think about what else I might be able to do, and I ended up working at, I did a story with Pop-Up Magazine, which I don't know how many people here are familiar with Pop-Up, but it's a California-based company, and they do these kind of live magazines, and you create something that people only see once, and they only see at that particular moment, and there's no videotaping, but it's also incredibly hard to recreate. And the piece that I worked on was about a guy I'd met through just kind of a ad hoc system of tools and software programs to sub in as his memory. So he was totally outsourcing his brain and what we already do, but really was making him incredibly functional to be a husband and a father and actually a pastor. So I worked on a piece about his life and paired up with a team of a Chicago team of puppeteers, and they live acted the show, and then we had an orchestra that played music for it, and I read the script. So that was like actually a really cool experience of thinking about the value of a story that only lives for about 5 minutes. I think our total runtime actually, the longest we did was maybe like 7 minutes. So that was actually really fun. And then I also worked on a VR story for the New York Times about a musician that I followed, and the story was about the life cycle of creating a song from inception, basically writing a couple words in a diary, to actually performing it on stage. And I followed this band and the band is interestingly enough called The Internet, but it was funny. But, so following them and doing this VR experience, and again, it was this really interesting, there was a print text piece that went along with it, but it was so wild to make something in a totally different dimension, I guess, that most people didn't actually watch. Like, I don't know what the numbers were, but I think most people read the story or listened to their music. They didn't see that experience, but it took months to make, and so it was really fulfilling to work on, but also kind of amazing because it was this similarly weirdly ephemeral thing that not a lot of people saw. So anyway, so that was the context. I guess I sort of started thinking about not necessarily who was going to be able to see the work that I was producing, but kind of the body of it and the content of it and the quality of it, and sort of having it be the most interesting and creative representation, or the most interesting way to represent the material versus getting it to the most number of people, or in the most, I guess, basic form, just text. And so that was sort of this sort of revolution, or this kind of evolution I went through over the last 18 months, and thinking about myself as a journalist. And yeah, so about, so this time, or not exactly this time, but about a year ago, last winter, I was in my apartment in Brooklyn, and I was at home. We were having a snowstorm. It was freezing here. And I was looking at Instagram, which is one of my favorite mediums right now. And so I was just scrolling through Willow Smith's Instagram. And if you don't follow her, you should, because she's incredible. And she has this hashtag that she uses called Mystery School. And so it's kind of her own explorations of ideas and philosophies and just thinking about herself as a human in the world. And I got really invested and spent like 3 hours in a K-hole just looking at all of her pictures. And I came away with this idea of how young people, or her in particular, seems to be creating or living in this totally other universe. Like she really is, she grew up famous, she's a musician, she's trying to create this alternate reality. And I got really, really, really invested in this world that she was creating and just presenting on Instagram. And it felt like I felt like I was like witnessing or viewing or reading, or I have no idea what I was doing, just like experiencing this strange alternate world, like almost like an ARG or like a piece of fanfic. Like it was so confusing. And I started writing just based on looking at her Instagrams. Like I started imagining a world populated by people in that age group. And I had sort of started thinking about this as kind of a dystopian / utopian piece of fiction about what would it be like for kids to grow up in a world where nothing looks like it does today. Or sort of there's no real sense of hierarchies, there's no real sense of social order, like all the things that we value are totally gone. And this was based on, I love sci-fi, all the various zombie plague movies, things I grew up watching as a child, like very excited by them. My parents were very disturbed by this, but it turned out fine. But so, you know, just kind of situating some characters in this landscape. And I just wrote through the story and designed some technology that they would have access to, and thinking a lot about what their lives would be like. And I mean, you know, still doing my day job. My day job didn't change, but I have been writing thousands and thousands of words about these kids and kind of mapping their journey as they kind of navigate this very post-modern landscape. And so a friend asked me to read something that I'd been working on at a reading. And I decided to read from this piece of work, which I called The Loop, based on a piece of technology that they have, which functions kind of like a watchmaker's loop, or is a little bit like a motion-activated piece of Google Glass that they use to like survey things and organic compounds in the landscape around them. And I read it at this event. And right after, a literary agent came up to me and asked me about it, and we were talking about it, and as these things happened, we started emailing and having lunch about it. And I got really stressed out because the thought of trying to write an actual YA book or any kind of book it just felt so far off of what I was doing. Even though I was so invested in these characters, I got really stressed out about the thought of having to make this good in a traditional sense. And then what if it ends up being terrible? I don't know. I just got really, really, really anxious about it. And so kind of shelved it for a few months, and then was DMing with a friend of mine who had seen the talk or had seen the reading, and asked me what was going to happen with the story. And so, you know, I started sort of thinking about it. I read a lot of, oh my gosh, Youth in Decline. Youth in Decline is this label that puts out a lot of really weird and strange comics, and I don't know where they're based. I buy all their stuff online, but they put out these very strange and somewhat deranged, you know, stories about youth in decline. And so I got really motivated and started thinking about the story as a series of comics, but I have a very short attention span. I wanted to make something that didn't have to sort of, you know, it wasn't bound to traditional modes of publishing, that would be very visual, very much like Willow Smith's Instagram, keeping with the same source of inspiration, something that people would be really excited. I thought a lot about how we all kind of are really excited when an entire series of something comes online, and we just binge through it, or you kind of pace it out, or I don't know. I wanted to sort of see if I could recreate that experience with a short story. So I've been working on figuring out how to parcel out this very long epic drama that I have about these two girls traveling in a post-apocalyptic landscape, but like, you know, working with an illustrator who fits my aesthetic, which is very much Eon Flux meets Instagram meets Snapchat meets, you know, strange minimalist interiors. And yeah, I mean, I guess this is kind of what my talk's about, which is like this idea of like, how do you create, how do you sort of explode apart this idea of a long form book that's something that, but it also kind of has this very compelling and is serialized. I mean, it's something I'm thinking about doing in emails. Like I just don't want there to be I don't even want you to be able to sign up for it. I kind of want people to hear about it almost like a weird computer virus. Like someone has to forward it to you and it's like, what is this weird file? Like, or maybe it's a Dropbox and the files upload to it in a very strange way. So I guess I'm just really interested in experimenting with new ways of discovery and new ways to come across something that's very exciting and doesn't look like anything else that's out right now, because I feel like there is interest in that, and I think people do like things that feel very unusual and immersive and they kind of command all of your attention, and I feel like I want to see things that don't necessarily have to live with a monetary value. Like, you don't have to kind of create something that you think is going to get optioned or will sell however many copies, because anyone that's ever spent time with the literary agent, they sort of talk about commercial, like how commercial your idea is, which is just like, fuck that. Like, I just want to make something good. Like, I don't need it to necessarily sell. Hi, Julia. Anyway, so that's, I don't know, this is I wrote notes and I'm not looking at them, so I'm sure I'm missing something, but I just wanted to talk through this idea that I've been thinking about, because I feel like we're getting very caught up in sort of the way things have to be because of the formats, and there are, the web or print or whatever makes it feel like there are these very specific formats that things have to live in, and I want to think much bigger and broader than that, because I feel like we need more exciting, immersive experiences that border on entertainment and also alternate realities in general. So that's what I have.
Thank you. So now we're going to have Alexandra Kleeman. Yeah?
Hi. Oh, is this loud enough for people? Okay. So I'm a writer, a fiction writer, and I come at this from the perspective of someone who pretty much writes for paper all the time, like endless amounts of paper with not that much play in formatting or the inclusion of images or whatever. It's pretty traditional, but I was so excited when I was asked to be on this panel because I come out of a program too where a lot of the first hypertext originated, and an undergraduate program that wanted to write for virtual reality and things, like to varying degrees of success. So I've always been interested in that, and yet I've been writing very, like, literally flat works for a while. And I was also scared when I was asked to be on this panel because, as one reviewer pointed out, there are exactly 3 references to the internet in my debut novel. And they're sort of there to tell the reader, no, this is not a parallel universe. This is a universe that has the internet, but we hardly look at it. And that's for a few reasons that I want to talk about now. Like, my first novel originally started out for me as kind of a challenge to myself. Like, I noticed I was writing a lot of very surreal, dreamlike short stories, dreamlike works, where I had utter control of the environment. You'd have an empty room, there'd be a table, a knife, a vase full of flowers, and then 2 or more people, and then you'd see what sort of happened in that space. And these were spaces that, as like I think we're going to talk about a lot over the course of this panel, are sort of cleansed of very modern technology, the technology that we use in our everyday lives that pushes back on us in interesting and mundane ways. So I told myself, like, among my other goals, one of my main goals is to metabolize the life that I actually live, to incorporate the technology that I actually use. And what ended up happening was sort of a very media-heavy book. It's got radio, a lot of television, a lot of print ads, a lot of publications, but the internet only makes a couple appearances. And part of this is, part of it was sort of space restriction. Like Julia was talking about, if you are immersed in the publishing world, you sort of get the sense from them that the ideal book is between 280 and 320 pages, contains 1, maximum 2 protagonists, 2 storylines, and is pretty easy to read whether you're sitting at home alone or standing up on the subway or on an elliptical or something. So it wants you to focus all of your attention on it, and also doesn't want to push your attention span so much that you leave your satisfaction zone, I think. Like, satisfaction is this unspoken rule of literary publishing, I feel. So as I was trying to incorporate the internet into my work and to have sort of interruptions from images found on websites or animated GIFs or looping GIFs, I kept running into the problem that like dilating the descriptions of these things the way I was dilating the descriptions of a lot of other activities I described in the book, like eating an orange or applying makeup, sort of made them grow really unwieldy. So there was something about how much information is contained in an internet image that makes it like puff up, like it's dehydrated. And when you describe it, then it can take on like long lengths. So my book was sort of bloating out as I tried to write about the internet. Another thing is a lot of the images I wanted to write about, I wasn't really sure how much introduction my reader would need to them. Like, they didn't exist in this sphere of like, everyone knows a cell phone, everyone knows a text message. You don't even need to, you know, say that the text message beeps. It can be a text message directly and instantaneously. But what about like a looping animated porn GIF on the side banner of a website? Like, I think everyone knows that, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'm writing this extra text that like feels clunky to me because it's bringing the reader into a rudimentary understanding of this thing that they might already know about. So that felt aesthetically like tenuous to me, I guess. And then the other thing was that writing about the internet in the framework I already had in my book, where I was trying to do something like that felt a little bit like a detective story, that felt like a character exploring an unknown situation and maybe getting lost. The versions of the internet that I was creating just didn't feel like they had the texture of internet browsing, and that thing that I like, where you can fall down a genuine rabbit hole, where you can lose track of time, where you remember the sequence of things that you visited instead of in what order and why, and what led you from one to the other. Sort of like you remember your internet browsing history as if in a dream. So because I felt like I couldn't do it justice in the framework I already had, I started stripping my references out, and I'm working on, like, I just wrote a short story that has an internet browse sequence in it, and the images come up to sort of, they parallel the protagonist's internal state. And I think they resemble the experience of browsing, but they also are not the experience of browsing, and I know that it's inadequate to like serve my own experience. So I'm still working on it, and I'm really curious to hear how other people have tried to solve this problem. But I want to just touch on one more thing, and I think that another challenge to really telling the stories in a way that's true to how the internet acts and works and the specific type of agency it has is sort of our fixation on a central storyline or a couple central storylines, you know? Like, there's this trend, I think, in modern novels to streamline stories down to the experience of one character or the experience of two characters who ideally like meet or cross paths at one point, like Mrs. Dalloway, extended and modernized. And what I love so much about tracking a story as it sort of unfolds on the web and through media is that you get a lot of pushback. You want to track, say, the story of the Paris terrorist attacks, but mixed among them are tweets that genuinely, stubbornly resist that storyline, that resist it in tone, that resist it in content, and that refuse to acknowledge the primacy of that one story. So I think one question for me is how we can build in stories that use the internet, but don't use the internet just as a way of telling the story we already have in mind, but show, you know, the way the internet wants to channel other stories, the sort of ADD nature of the web, and the interesting way that this makes us sort of consider parallel tracks when we're reading. So that's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you. So I also want to just one housekeeping thing. Remember, you can also tweet questions that I can pull from also using the session hashtag K3. Is the Wi-Fi acting up? Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. But you could have done that. So, okay, so now we'll have Laurie Penny. Yeah. Or are you going dead last? Are you doing last?
Do I? Alish. Oh no! Don't be a gentleman. I'll go last then. Go on, I'll go last. You go now.
Okay.
You asked for
Alesh Khat.
Hi, everyone. I wrote you a letter because I got very nervous when I found out that this wasn't just a discussion but a keynote. That then followed by a discussion, which I think was sort of a shock for all of us, but sort of a pleasant shock, and I'm kind of happy about it. Anyway, I wrote this up, so I'm going to be sort of reading it and sort of, flowing around it, and it's going to be mess, and hopefully it's going to be some sort of a beautiful mess. I'm also going to try to speak closer to this, I promise. So, we're always crashing in the same car. Reality is an extension of our body, and the internet is a panicked reaction to the atom bomb. Yes, DARPA believed America should have the internet to keep all its knowledge in case of a nuclear war on American soil. But the people behind DARPA didn't think far enough because, at least consciously they didn't, but unconsciously they might have, because the internet became our unconscious way of collecting all data about humanity before we put it on the last functioning SpaceX rocket after everything else fails. And the rocket will take our knowledge, including DNA modification and epigenetics and Kim Kardashian's Instagram account and selfie sticks, away from the planet, as the planet kills us because we pissed it off way too much and it got bored with us and we have done way too little to save it. Well, actually not save it, but save ourselves. The planet's going to be just fine, actually. And, then the artificial intelligence on the rocket, which will be sort of charged with guarding our collective data consciousness, gains sentience while traveling through space, alone, without us, but sort of with us, containing us within it. And the first true AI will become, in an ironic twist, sentient only after we all die, so there will be really no one to prove it. And its sentience will maybe emerge from its grief over our loss. And I could expound on how that will lead to the same AI deciding that it wants to recreate us because we are the only friend it ever had, even though we never knew we were its friend in the first place. So it becomes the monolith from 2001, a space odyssey, and then it projects us into space and thus creating this reality again. Because that's actually one of the leading scientific theories now about the nature of our reality. We are essentially a holograph, like everyone here and everything. And, being a holograph in some circles can mean being less than real. Like the internet, for some people, also means something less real. And, thankfully, all of us sort of know that that's a nonsense. And that's why we're here. But anyway, we're all crashing in the same car, and we invent a new form, and then we misunderstand it, and we commercialize it, and we subvert it, and build on it, and then we proclaim it dead, of course, abandon it, and we come back to it, and we are forever leaving and returning, and the form becomes embedded in us and mutates endlessly, the way a body mutates when inside a car that crashes into another. And we are both the car and the body. And the glass shards create a geometry of continuous invention and tear through our meat, interested in dissecting us the same way we here now are interested in dissecting what reality means and what the internet means too. So I guess what I'm saying is that reality is a bit of a fender bender, and sometimes it can also happen in slow motion. And the slow motion, case in point, it took us about 30 years of widespread use of TV from the 1950s to the 1980s to get to Videodrome, which is sort of a seminal text for probably every third person here, I would suspect. It's a blend of old and new reality that recognizes the paradoxical evolutionary dance of kindness and violence that's sort of always present within the moment. That's just how evolution works. Things die, things change, things are born from that death at the same time. And it's no wonder we're not there yet with the internet, but we are making strides. We are inventing stories that are inventing new possibilities new art forms, and we are finally recognizing that everything is nature. The machine is nature. There is no escaping nature, and therefore there is no escaping the machine. We might as well do our best to become friends with it and maybe be conscious of it before it leaves us forever because we're going to be dead. And, of course, maybe if Werner Herzog is here right now, he might jump up on the stage next, and tell us that he discovered no kinship and no understanding and no mercy in nature whatsoever, only overwhelming indifference. And he will say that the nature is the bear from the grizzly man, and that the common denominator of the universe is not harmony at all, but chaos and hostility and murder. So in other words, it's quite likely that Werner Herzog is a digital dualist. I really hope he's never going to hear this. I'm so sorry. Anyway, it's also quite likely that the monolith is rotating in space, and perhaps it's not indifferent to us but missing us, and perhaps it's already wishing we knew a little more than we know right now, and it's wishing and hoping we would try to peel the layer of reality a little bit further until it buckles and folds and, reveals new shapes in 5D or 6D or whatever the next frontier of our perception is. Maybe the monolith is wishing we wouldn't get so stuck on the idea that we are always crashing in the same car, because I'll let you in on a secret, most cars today are actually hackable, and when David Bowie wrote that song, they weren't. So we're not really crashing in the same car, technically speaking. So David Bowie is great, but he wasn't entirely right. He was just right about most things. So yeah, we're also not always crashing in the same car, but we're always crashing. And the crash can be a beautiful thing that we can always learn from. And, those of you who read Ballard already know that. The rest of you read Crash, it's great. Thank you for coming here to celebrate the car wreck of 2016 with us. And thank you, David Bowie, for telling us that learning is always okay, no matter how strange the subject, and that also, no matter how strange the subject, we can always become friends with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now, Laurie.
I'll have what he's having. I think you just made Nathan very, very happy. Thank you. Oh, Videodrome. All right, so I'm here to serve some full nerd for you guys, basically, because I'm going to talk about fan fiction. And they wouldn't let me use my slide because it was the only slide that we had in this, and so but it was a beautiful slide. And I was so proud of it because I don't often make slides. It took me ages.
Yeah, we should definitely. And then the official account will retweet it. We'll make sure everyone gets it.
It's beautiful. It's got Kirk and Spock on it. It's a still from the little known. So yes, all right. So I'm going to start here. So on or around the early months of the year 1998, literary history changed forever, because that was when the not-for-profit site fanfiction.net launched. But fanfiction is something that predates the internet, and it predates it depends on how you argue it, but it predates even the printing press, because there are many theories of when the first fan fiction was. Some people say it was the Bible. Many people trying to tell the slightly different stories about Jesus, different kinds of canon, different kinds of head canon. Who was Jesus' favorite? Still, people are still arguing about that. Chaucer, fan fiction of Boccaccio, Shakespeare remixing everything. But then you get the real kind of golden age of fan fiction begins in the 1970s, and it begins with Star Trek fic. And the reason I want to talk to you about this today, as a journalist and an author and a nerd and somebody who thinks stories are really, really incredibly important, and the way we talk about canons is incredibly important, the way we construct canons and the way we decide whose stories get to matter. I think fan fiction is an object lesson in how all of these things are changing right now, and now I'm going to talk about Star Trek. Star Trek is much more. My whole thing is Star Trek is much more important than people realize, and we're not going to talk about the new movies because they are themselves fan fiction, and they're quite good because everyone's hotter in them, and it's well, it is. Yeah, come on, like, yeah. But in 1977, which there was the publication of Desert Heat, one of the best known and most seminal Spock Kirk / fiction stories, and you were going to have a still of that to look at for this entire 10-minute talk. And if you were uncomfortable with that, you could just look at my face. That's okay. But it was beautiful. It was beautiful. In Desert Heat, it's a story in which the unspoken subtext of Star Trek, which is that Spock and Kirk are in love and meant to be together, becomes reality. So Spock and Kirk are stuck on Vulcan, and they're wandering in the desert. And I don't know if anybody's not a Star Trek fan, but basically, you know, Vulcans go into heat and they have to have sex or they'll die, right? You know, it's called Ponfar. And this happens to Spock while he's in the desert. Spock goes into Ponfar, and this story is so Spock is like, I am in Ponfar and I must have sex or I shall surely die. And Kirk basically goes, I volunteer as tribute, and and thus /fiction is born. And so this circulated in various magazines and groups, and fans actually were so important, and the fan fiction community was so important that it got Star Trek recommissioned for the second and third series, because, you know, they were just like, this is the most important thing that's ever been made, you must bring it back. So, you know, thanks, fan community. But the fiction was, and the writing of fiction in that universe and stuff that didn't get to appear on screen was always very important in the history of Star Trek. And now it is important in the history of almost every collective story that we have. And I profoundly believe that the big collective myths of our time are things that traditional literary critics don't pay enough attention to, and traditional cultural critics still aren't paying enough attention to. So from 1998 onwards, fan fiction exploded. And a lot of today's writers of this kind of generation and the generations coming up got their start writing stories set in established universes with established characters, or sometimes self-insert characters, or, you know, OC means original character, which is really exciting. But it's exciting to me. Come on, somebody. But and this is how people started and got their start and learned to write. And I'm one of these people, actually. I recently went home to my mum's house and I found some of my old Buffy fanfic in a notebook. It was amazing. It's got a very obvious Mary Sue written by 15-year-old Laurie. She gets to have sex with Spike and Xander because she's just so amazing. She's a vampire and a witch. I couldn't decide. Yeah. And now somebody let me actually publish a print book, which is really amazing to me. But anyway, what is interesting about this is that it crosses over with what you were talking about in terms of hypertext literature, because around 1998, and in that whole area of people getting really excited about the literary and storytelling potential of the internet, there were lots of experiments in what a story could mean. At that time, you know, writers saying, hang on, you know, maybe we could make stories that don't have a beginning and or a middle or an end, stories that don't have characters and you can just loop continually around the same thing, or, you know, you can go deep into one experience and one bit links to another, and you can still find some of these, you know, fossilized in, you know, like in the howling desert of GeoCities, and you know, you can still find many of these, but one of the reasons it wasn't very effective is that it turns out people really want narrative. People want stories. People want patterns to impose on the unspeakable randomness of real life, and to help them understand it, and to help them rehearse it, and to help them deal with trauma. That's what stories have always been about. That's what they always will be about, as far as I'm concerned. But what is happening with fan fiction at that time is instead of having lots of different ways of telling a story, you're having lots of different stories within the same universe. And that is reflected in what is happening now, both in fiction and in real life, I think. Because, what is important about Desert Heat, about, Spock Kirk, is that this is something, the idea of having a Spock-Kirk relationship, we can kind of snicker at it now. I mean, you got to understand that fanfickers are still, geeks like to think that we don't have any hierarchy, but we definitely do, right? And fanfickers have always been, somewhere, a couple of steps below tabletop role players and like a couple of steps above furries in nobody be mean to furries, they're lovely. It's like, yeah. So everybody likes to laugh at fanfickers, but I think it's very, very important because people are writing into fanfic stuff that was never allowed to be published, never allowed to be shown, even in Star Trek, which was at the time incredibly daring, the first interracial kiss on TV, it's vision of a post-scarcity economy, but you could never show Kirk and Spock kissing or doing anything else. You could never have that kind of depiction, and people wanted to see it because that's what they wanted to read and experience and also get off to. I'm going to talk now a little bit about Harry Potter fanfic because I think that's one of the most interesting worlds, because the people reading and writing Harry Potter fanfic are the generation who really grew up with the internet. The first generation to grow up with the internet are also the Harry Potter generation. And those stories are very traditional. There is no sex in them. There's they do that YA thing where there's occasionally there's a kiss, and that's code for sex, obviously. But in Harry Potter fanfic, there is huge amounts of erotic content in there. There's huge amounts of smut, huge amounts of alternative stories going into favorite characters' backstories, and all of this is happening at the same time. There are stories that, if you were just to write one story in the Harry Potter universe, they couldn't all happen in the same time frame because you have, Sirius and Remus having your relationship, but then you also have Remus and Tonks, and then you also have Tonks and Harry and everyone, and everybody's canon is different. That's the point. Everybody's idea of what happens in this universe is different, but they are allowed to coexist in this community. And that is what I am seeing happening more and more on the social justice internet. It is the idea that we can have not just one story, but multiple stories and better stories. What fanfiction is about, and understand that fanfiction has always been dominated by women, a lot by people of color, by queer people, by people whose stories were not getting told, by people who wanted to open their favorite book and read something that they could relate to, and when they didn't find anything that they could relate to quite as much, when it just, the magic just wasn't there, they wrote in the gay sex, they wrote in the smut, 14-year-old, and you can tell that these are 14-year-old people because, or I hope they are, because they have some people have a really weird understanding of anatomy, but that doesn't, but that doesn't matter because you can have all these realities coexisting, and there is a wonderful sense of community around of beta reading, and J.K. Rowling is one of the writers who really encourages fanfic as long as people don't make any money off it, which I've always thought was very generous. And one of the things that is happening now is that the people who grew up writing fanfic and who grew up reading fanfic are now becoming the next generation of writers and creators, and they're making their own shows, they're writing their own novels, and they're writing different kinds of stories. This has been an active debate, particularly within the science fiction community. I don't know if anybody followed last year's furore over the Hugo Awards. Anybody? Yeah, kind of little bit of a murmur there. Yeah, it was very bad, but also very interesting because we have all these stories by women, people of color, queer people suddenly coming out and being brilliant and winning all of these awards. And, some people within traditional science fiction are like, hang on, this isn't real science fiction. Real science fiction is about men starting wars on the moon. and that's and they should and that's what it should always be about. And then they tried to rig the awards, and it all went horribly wrong for them, and everybody laughed. Well, I did at least. And you have more and more shows and more stories coming out which are telling these different stories. I mean, you look at what is happening now with the new Star Wars installment, which is basically Star Wars fan fiction, right? It is. But what is different, the only thing that is new and different and incredible about that is it features a different cast of characters. It has a female protagonist with a black love interest, and that is unbelievably radical in and of itself. But it reads like a fan fiction story that somebody wrote in the 1980s after watching Star Wars and realizing that this could be better. It's a great story, but it could just be better if you just change the cast. And that is, that's what, for me, literature and storytelling is about right now. That's the exciting thing. It's why I read science fiction. It's why I write science fiction, and why I think that, that era, that whole world of creativity is so, so important, because it speaks to how narrative is being weaponized by social justice communities. Not one story, but many stories coexisting at the same time. Room for lots and lots of people's stories, and room for stories that aren't just white guys with their bases on the moon having wars. And I wanted to end with the idea of headcanon, which I was having a conversation about yesterday. Does anybody know the phrase headcanon? Yeah. So headcanon is a phrase that came out of the fan fiction community, and it matters a lot to me. It means something that doesn't actually happen in the story. It's not written down. The author didn't think it, but in your head you believe it so sincerely that it may as well be true. And I always like to say that post-patriarchy is my headcanon. And, luxury automated communism is my headcanon. And, yay! And if I believe it, maybe someday it will be true. So, and until then, I'll keep on telling stories, reading them. So that's my talk. Thanks.
Keep applauding for the whole panel. Yeah. So Laurie has opened the door for me to cross something off the very top of my bucket list. This is huge for me. In Season 5, Episode 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation, Picard is stranded on an island. I'm going for it. This isn't a joke. Picard is stranded on a planet with alien Captain Dathon. Dathon, right? Yeah. He's from an alien race that can only speak in metaphors, right? Yeah, like Jalad at Tanagra, right? And right, yeah. Fist as arms closed. Yeah, and I bring that up because I think this is actually useful. It's kind of how we use the internet most often in our storytelling, as like these metaphors that like don't quite land. I think of like I was really excited for, but managed expectations for the new X-Files release, and old X-File, and then everything happened with it, right? But the original X-Files, the first 9 seasons, actually dealt with the internet better than the last 6 episodes, and so I think there is also a little bit of slipping ground, and I wonder what is happening that we're like that the internet is just this metaphor that never lands. It's something that like we're trying to get across this like very profound but also like eloquent thing about like the new sociality of how we're all connected, but instead you just get like Mulder and Scully looking at something that looked a lot like web TV, right? And that's all we get. And I want to pick all your brains. This is for everyone. Like how did we get here? Or what do you think is created that?
The whole universe was in a hot, dense state. And then nearly 40 million years ago, no, it's not. I don't know. Come on, guys. That was my contribution.
I think you are pointing at something that's really interesting about the way the internet is used. Like, frequently people seem to use it as an information delivery device, and it's true that the internet can deliver information, but what feels so false about it, I think, is that exactly the information that would be relevant to the plot is delivered at exactly the time that it would influence the events of the plot and cause the characters to leave the internet, like back into the real space of the adventure or whatever. I think that when Laurie was talking about hypertext, one of the things that hypertext was trying to do, right, was think about the new type of agency we have when reading and exploring on the internet. And then the way it tried to integrate that was actually through like the very old mechanism used by choose your own adventure books, right? Like you have one binary decision. You can click here or click here, and you'll be taken to a different swath of text. Like you're reading a book and you're reading it out of order, but you choose how out of order you want it to be. So I think that what people haven't figured out is how to pair sort of this one-channel streaming type of entertainment with a process that is necessarily multiple, plural, and branching constantly. So I don't know. I think it takes more thought on the part of our television creators to figure out how to make the internet like a generative source of information, how to make it introduce something unexpected, instead of just seeing something happen in a web TV news studio. That's basically like you could be reading it on a blog, or you could be seeing it on Twitter, or you could be reading it in a newspaper. It's on the internet by chance, not by necessity.
Okay. I think that how we got there, and I don't think that's the entirety of it actually, I think that in some ways we're doing a really good job, but I think how we got there is by othering the internet. Because when we really other the internet, instead of seeing it as a part of our current reality and not as something that is necessarily to be feared or to be approached from a position of a thing that is very much outside us, it becomes sort of like, looking at a corpse. And the thing is, internet is really not a corpse. It's very much around us at all times. And when it comes to TV alone, there's actually a great example of that, because even with X-Files, if you're watching it on TV, or if you're watching it, let's say, on Amazon or wherever, unless you illegally are streaming it or are, stealing it, which no one here has ever done, right?
No.
You can choose the option of having extra embedded content within it, which in itself alone creates an extra text overlaid over the text of the show, and how you interact with that text is up to you. And that's sort of almost gamification of TV and of movies, and that's something that I think is only just starting to emerge and is going to play a far more crucial role. I think that where we see it in a much more prevalent way already are video games, where with certain video games, especially if we're talking high-quality RPG video games, we are not only playing the video game in ways that can branch and that can alter not only the storyline itself, but also the world itself, which is actually a huge evolution of storytelling in general that we're just starting to sort of nudge. What you also get is you get extra content, you get DLCs, you get things that you download as you're already playing the game, or you don't have to download, and they intersect with everything else that you're doing. And all of those things are so incredibly interactive that even forms that are partially ossified in presenting internet are simultaneously almost attacked by the internet itself and are not able to stay in that static state. And so, yeah, I don't think it's actually much of a problem, because they can't resist. The future is ours, essentially.
I think
I mean, I think it's hard to capture it accurately because we're still figuring out our relationship to it. And actually, as you guys were talking, I was trying to think of like my most favorite moments of seeing the internet acted out and on a screen. And I think I thought about I don't know if anyone saw Me and You and Everyone We Know, the Miranda July film that came out a few years ago. And when the little boy is like in the library typing and he's doing the arrows to mean like poop back and forth forever, and someone in the other end is having this like incredible revelatory moment and they're like, yes, forever, but the little boy is like literally just talking about poop, and it's just the most perfect moment. It's like I don't know. I was that child, actually. I was 8 years old on the internet typing to strangers when my parents were asleep. So it's like that resonated for me. But I think there's something really interesting, though. I mean, I think we're really good at imagining the internet when it's either kind of a joke on us or when it's our kind of distorted into our wildest fantasies and or fears, a la Black Mirror, And I think it's really, like, we can only sort of see it in its most grotesque forms, I think, because it is omnipresent. And I think there's something really strange about that. And when I think about how you would capture the internet, it's sort of like, does anyone remember that joke, that practical joke that was going around maybe a year or two ago, where you would text someone a GIF of the speech bubbles, and so they were like looking at it, like thinking someone was about to text them, but it was like the best thing ever. And I always wanted to write about that, and I didn't, because I thought it captured the most exciting part about being online, which was that there was someone else there. And those speech bubbles are so addictive because you're like, someone's going to text me back. And it doesn't matter what they say. The point is that you are teleported, that there is a tiny piece of glass between you and a human. And it's a really fucking good feeling, or the red. It's the most disastrous, depending on who you're waiting to hear from. But, it's sort of like knowing that someone is on the other line is so exciting. And how do you capture that? I mean, I remember when I was more of a tech reporter, the photo editor would come over whenever I had a story and be like, please tell me, like, we don't just have to shoot someone on their cell phones. And I'm like, sorry, this week we're shooting someone on their cell phone, because there's nothing there, and it's a very hard story to tell. And so I think, that there's so much internally happening while we're on our machines that it's very hard to capture unless you can sort of see inside someone's brain. And unfortunately, I guess most filmmakers and TV makers either aren't as familiar with that themselves, or they haven't figured out how you get inside someone's head and record. I don't know, like, actors only have a very limited range of things they can do while they're looking at a screen. So it makes it really hard to capture the kind of tidal wave of emotions and feelings and things that are happening when we're on these machines. So I don't know, I think about that sometimes. It is really hard to capture. But then I have this theory, though, that like in the last couple years, I've noticed that a lot of big name Hollywood films have gotten really, really, really good at capturing what happens when you take massive amounts of drugs. And I think that's just because the new generation of filmmakers right now are familiar with that experience. So I think in about 10 years, it'll actually get really good. Because before it used to be like someone would eat a bunch of acid or ecstasy and they would be like, I'm a giant glass of orange juice. And you're like, that's not really what happens. But now there are a lot of films where you're kind of like, this is kind of what it's like. So I think maybe it'll just take another turnover of content creators to sort of actually be able to make the internet look not incredibly boring in the realm of only ultra nerds, which is offensive, actually.
Is this working?
Yes.
I'm personally really excited for the eventual movie or whatever it's going to be, where someone's going to show what it's like to be on acid and on the internet at the same time.
Confusing.
4chan, the movie. The Return. It's like, the journalist Quinn Norton said it best when she's described the dilemma for not just filmmakers and writers, but also, journalists and news reporters trying to describe so many of the most exciting political stories that are happening right now. And she says that the problem for a lot of writers is that falling in love, breaking into a bank, bringing down the government, they all look the same from the outside right now because they all look like typing. They all just look like someone sitting there going, and you don't know what they're doing behind that screen. But I definitely agree with Jenna. I think this is something that will work itself out in give it 10 years maximum, because at the moment, if you look at a lot of particularly a lot of novels. I'm thinking of The Circle. I'm thinking of a book I read recently and otherwise loved called Whispers Through a Megaphone. There's this tendency to treat the internet as something hostile and to have those critiques. Well, like, this is taking us away from our real selves. But for the new generation of writers and thinkers and directors, the internet is just another way of being. It's just an extension of our real selves, and there can be just as much emotion and just as much reality in that interaction. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day about The Great Gatsby and whether it's any good. And I think, when a book is that iconic, that that's the question of whether or not it's any good ceases to matter quite as much, because it's totemic, it's relevant in various ways. But I'm thinking about that image at the end of the green light and looking out across the bay at the green light and never quite being able to reach it. And I remember saying, or I can't remember if I said this or my friend said this, so I feel bad taking credit for it. But isn't the modern equivalent of that is G-Chat, where you're looking at a window and there's that green button and you can tell your friend is there, but they're not responding to you? Isn't that like the modern day Gatsby green light across the bay? It's the same emotion. It's, why won't you pay me attention? I just can't bridge that divide. And the metaphors are there, and they'll be, and we're getting better at making them. We're just, we're still normalizing this within the kind of people who have power in the narratives we make collectively. So, yeah.
So one thing that I think we're starting to move toward. Hello. Yeah. One thing we're starting to move toward is starting to think about, well, what is all this going to look like once, as you said, like the people that have been growing up with the internet can describe it or depict it in a much more, I'm not even going to say realistic, but I think the answer is like intimate, like the word is intimate way, like an intimate way, because we can accurately show someone, typing on a keyboard and saying I'm in, right? But like, what is this going to look like with a more intimate relationship to the internet and storytelling? Because I've read all of your work, and I think one thing that goes across all of your work is a sort of like staccato-ness, right? Which is I'm gonna say different than like inattention, right? But it is like short bursts of things that then you realize have an arc or like a theme or something cross-cutting. And so that's my theory, and you can either go with it or go against it or ignore it completely. But what is the future of this looking like?
Well, I think on a grand level, one of the things where we're going to be able to really trace it well within mainstream, especially within movies in the next 10 years, is it's going to be the moment when hackers stop being exclusively bad guys or sidekicks who are sort of ambivalent in big Hollywood movies. I actually think that's going to be one crucial, really easily traceable point. We're going to start seeing that more and more people who have more than just rudimentary fear and understanding of what it actually can mean are entering that entire art form and that entire industry. I think that's going to be huge, and I have no idea what else I wanted to say. That's okay though, because we're I want everyone to get into it that wants to, but we're I think 25 minutes away from the next panel. We're at 7:20 now, so I want everyone to say something, but then I definitely want to make sure that we have time for audience questions. So just a real quick thing, and then we can go to the audience.
Okay, well, I definitely agree about the staccato style, and I think that part of that is also a way of returning agency to the reader, because the reader is synthesizing, or they're choosing not to synthesize. They're choosing to link two bits the way that they want to instead of some sort of predetermined way. And it's also a format that's a little bit more open, I think. So it leaves room for information to enter without having to depict the whole apparatus of information, which can be really annoying. So that you can introduce biological facts, or you can introduce something from the internet or something from a magazine page without having to say, like, she opened the magazine and looked at its like little dotted printed pictures, which would be terrible. Or interesting, but could be terrible. So that sort of like openness and ability to switch gears quickly, I think, is a precursor to being able to do the work we want to do of bringing the internet in as an agent.
It sort of reminds me of is this working? Yeah. It sort of reminds me of some of the later Sherlock Holmes stories where you see them dealing with this remarkable new technology, the gramophone, which and they do exactly what you're describing there with music. They describe somebody putting the needle on and then how it sounds. And of course, in fiction and movies later on, it's just embedded. It's either kind of described seamlessly or it's playing in the background. You don't have to make it. The fact of music happening, recorded music happening, is not something alien. It's just part of our everyday lives. But in terms of narrative arcs and narrative patterns, I disagree. I think I'm kind of really super old school when it comes to narrative and when it comes to story formats. I don't believe in any of that bullshit like the hero's journey and the kind of all the only certain arcs which turn out to be only applicable to white straight guys on a quest to get the girl and save the kingdom. But I think formats of stories are really important to us, and they're important to us partly because they're not natural. A narrative is a deeply unnatural thing because it's imposing a series of events and a structure and a pattern that is satisfying on an experience on lived human experience, which is multivarious and random and traumatic. And the function of narrative is to make that less traumatic, to provide a rehearsal for experiencing the exigencies of life, and to make it easier and bearable for us, and to make it, we're pattern-seeking creatures. We like to be able to see patterns in the lives we lead and the lives other people lead. I don't think that's going to go away. I don't want it to go away personally, but I think it's definitely something that all writers and all creators have to work at, but it's probably going to become harder for us as people who have grown up online to just go back to that craft of creating narrative arc. And I described it the other day because I'm doing fiction more seriously now, having done non-fiction professionally for a while. So it's like kind of being, say you're a master carpenter and you know how to make brilliant sculptures out of wood and you can carve it and it's beautiful, and then somebody comes to you and say, right now, build a shed. And it's a totally different set of skills with the same material, and you have to learn to make it stand up. It doesn't matter how pretty it is. And I think there is a element of craft there that's really important, and I hope that, for me, that the failure of hypertext literature is failure to pay attention to the actual craft of story making, which is not a natural thing.
Well, I just wanted to shout out a couple of authors I think who are contemporary right now and who are doing a really good job of imagining kind of what the world looks like when we're completely saturated. Because I do think some people have actually gotten it well. I don't know if it's translated, I guess in a major screen way, but I mean, Ready Player One is a great example of a phenomenal imagining of what a world looks like within another world that is totally when everybody's completely online. And even I was just rereading the Ted Chiang short story where he writes about a woman who is a zookeeper who is then employed to train digital beings that are animals that are kind of sentient, and training that, and sort of what happens to them over as the world and the program that they're built on becomes obsolete, which is a really, I wish I can remember what it's called. I can tweet it out later, but it's a phenomenal story. And even Octavia Butler's earliest work with the Lilith's Brood kind of imagines an alien race that is its own internet, because everyone's connected and talks to each other, and they talk to the planet that they're on and their ship as well. And I mean, even that's like so pre-internet. It's kind of crazy, but what she's talking about is like, I mean, it's maybe based on kind of botanical or biological networks, the way we know that plants and mushrooms and are able to talk to each other. But it's just phenomenal the way so there are some, I guess, some really interesting imaginings of the internet, although it doesn't necessarily look like the internet that we're experiencing right now. So I wanted to just bring that up. But I don't know where this is going. I mean, I guess I'm just sort of hopeful that, I think Laurie's right that we are going to enter into this sort of interesting multiverse. And we already are, I mean, you can look at the Kardashians. They're great. All they do is write their own fanfic, and they constantly blast it out and ask that we buy into it and buy their products, and many people do, and I actually commend them for it. But I do think we're going to enter into this really interesting period of time where people are able to completely craft their own stories and completely tell their own narratives and shape however they want the world to experience them and think about them and know them. I just hope that the creators, that if there are interesting creators who are, not the typical types of people who get paid to do this kind of thing, I don't know, I just hope that the queer and writers of color and women, they get elevated in a way that I just feel like all these big stories that are out right now that sort of dabble with science fiction or anything interesting are all still the same people that always get elevated and get the opportunity to make content. So I'm just hopeful that there is a continued, I guess more democratization of those spaces and those stories get told in a much more mainstream and profitable way, because it's great when people can do whatever they want online for fun and for free, but I would like to see people get paid for their creativity as well.
Yeah. So now I get to play 80s daytime talk show and go into the audience with my microphone to get questions.
Can I add something?
Yeah, one thing. Yeah.
All right. Two things. First of all, to elaborate on what you just said, I think that it's crucial that specifically the people who do get most possibilities in any sort of arts pretty much today, which would be straight white men, actually commit to making space for others without some sort of a weird white savior thing, but just from the genuine interest in actually making help, giving help, and just offering that space. And whether people take it or not is then up to them. Because frankly, there's enough space for everyone. It's just a matter of allocating it in a way that's fair. And one other thing that sort of seems to come from all this that we talked about is that I think we are very slowly, but in a sense not that slowly actually, changing how copyright works. I think that all of this, I think the fanfic, I think the ways we're approaching stories today, the way we're approaching self-narratives are inevitably going to completely transform what is being done with copyright today, where essentially if you're, let's say, Disney and you want to extend your copyright for another 50 years, shout out to my old employer, you just can, and that's not fair. It's frankly not fair to anyone here, It's not fair to even yourself if your job is to extend that copyright, because inevitably you are screwing everyone on the planet after a certain point. And I do think that we're getting into a space where it's going to be quite impossible to maintain copyright. Because you know what? One of the best Batman stories that I ever read is this fanfic Batman story about what would happen if Batman actually was Batman. If Bruce Wayne was Batman, and it's this short horror comic about this creep who goes out at night and basically tears nipples off homeless people and is incredibly sad. It just ends with him just dabbing into the wall with his finger as his finger just steadily peels off. And that's sort of like copyright today. That's the finger. And I like that. I'm looking forward to it.
Hi, thank you for this talk. This has been really phenomenal. In the interest of time, I think this question is mostly geared towards Laurie, but I'd really love everyone's take on it. And it's the juxtaposition in the fan fiction universe between what I'd call the Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality school and the My Immortal school of talking about Harry Potter fan fictions, right? So the Methods of Rationality is always being raised up as Harry is not fucking everyone in the around, and he's so cool and calm and collected and rational and all these sorts of, I'll leave it at that. Whereas My Immortal is always taken down, and quality of writing aside, there's always that sort of takedown of My Immortal, that it is a Mary Sue, that we cannot enjoy these sorts of types of writing. And so I guess my question is, as we think about the internet as a kind of intimate public space, and the reception of these works are generating new sorts of possibilities for what can or can't be produced, how do we make sense of that sort of dynamic involved in the writing and all the kind of gendered and racialized ways that becomes realistic? Yeah.
Thanks. All right, so My Immortal is awfully written but very fun smut, and Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality is considered this seminal work, and about what if Harry was actually properly investigating the magical universe and some atheism, and the atheist bros love it. So basically, one of the reasons, if not the big reason, why there is this distinction between proper literary kind of fan fiction written by dudes, and the rest of fan fiction is because it's considered silly when women want to talk about sex, and when people want to talk about stuff that white straight bros aren't interested in, because that's not proper literature, that's just silly stuff, that's the silly. And I think it's reproducing the same discourse of what gets to be proper literature and what gets to be a valuable story, and what doesn't. You can see it in the print publishing world today with how people talk about romance writing versus some of the things that get categorized as not romance writing, for endless stories about guys having about elderly professors having tortured weird feelings about students in their literature class. That's proper literature, whereas some romance writing isn't considered proper literature. And you get women writing about love and sex recategorized and put into different boxes with the pink sparkly covers, even when they're just as good writing as anything else. I think it's just reproducing that, honestly. But I think there is enough unbelievable quality, thick-like writing, that this will hopefully work itself out. And I think it will work itself out more as people who have come out of that world actually get power within the publishing industry and within broadcasting, which I think I'm hopeful is gradually starting to happen. Partly because, yes, it is a question of white straight guys making space, but it's also about everybody else just taking space, which I think is what's happening more and more, because it turns out that the reason that these stories are being promoted and everybody loves them is because they're fucking good. They're really, really good. They're better and they're more original, partly because they're stories that haven't been told as much before, and that's the reason they're killing it right now, and I hope will continue to do so.
Who's next? What do we got? Is your hand raised? Yeah. No? Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm kind of thinking out loud here, so this isn't like a fully formed question. But one frustration I've had is with the internet, we see this idea where clearly anyone can come up with an original story, get it out there, anyone can read it, view it, however you're putting it together. But you talking about fan fiction, my biggest frustration is there's so many amazing films out there and so much great work being produced, but mainstream theater is all fan fiction now. Every single freaking trailer is Angry Birds, fan fiction of an app, Emoji Movie, fan fiction of emoji. Yes, that's a thing that's coming out. Yes, it is.
Oh.
It's literally coming out. Yeah. Yeah. That's a truth bomb for today. And Star Trek, Star Wars, it's just, I'm curious how you see, even with Tumblr and reblogs and things, we're getting, I feel into this whirlwind of repetitive art, and yeah, there is inspiration, but then at the same time, how do you break out of that and get into truly original work?
And raise hands again real quick while they answer so I can get someone.
I think internet became our cinema. That's all.
Do you guys want to?
Yeah, I think what you're kind of talking about is the limits of nostalgia. And I got into I was home and very bored and couldn't sleep one night and started watching Fuller House, which was the biggest mistake I've made in my, although I will, and I tweeted this, but it's true, Kimmy Gibbler is a fucking artist. The woman that plays her, like chef's kiss, genius comedic actress. But it was horrible, and I just thought to myself, we're kind of seeing the clash between ultra commercialism and a lack of adventure. There's a fear around a box office bomb, and it's sort of all these market forces coming together in a way that's really annoying and problematic and gross. And I read the other day there's like an Animaniacs movie coming out, and I repped Animaniacs back in the day, and I will not see that. It's like I'd like to see something new. But I have become much more interested in kind of the way people have been playing off of each other in mediums like Instagram or in Snapchat, and places where things aren't so bound by ideas of what a traditional narrative or what a traditional arc is supposed to look like. And I've had a lot of fun. I don't know, I'm not a big movie or regular TV person, so I've really, really, really enjoyed kind of the terribleness of like short form ephemeral stuff. Even like The Magicians, which is that, I don't know if you guys read the book or watched the show, people were really disappointed in how the TV show turned out. I thought it was great. I thought it was obviously kind of lower budget, but I also thought it was incredibly immersive and interesting, and just not like anything else I'd really seen. It's more of like an adultier Harry Potter that does have the smut and the sex in it, and animorphs and various things. But I don't know, I really love those books, and people kind of turned me off from watching them because they didn't hold up to the standard of the canon, but I thought it was great. And so, I don't know, I think the really good stuff probably maybe either won't look very good or won't be in the traditional venues, which is kind of how it's always been. I don't know if that answers your question.
I feel like a lot of the temptation behind spinning things off endlessly is that people look at whatever franchise that's been dormant for a decade and a half and think that, oh, there's a ready-made audience for that. So when you write fan fiction also, I think some of the appeal is that you have an audience you're writing to, and you have people who are interested in seeing how you play with these characters that they're already invested in. So capitalizing on investment that people out there already have for characters that you can then take agency with. But I also think, and I don't know why this is the only example that's coming to mind, but like something like The Purge, it's an original story, I suppose, and it comes from someone's brain. It has no predecessor, and it's sort of low budget and as low budget and scrappy as maybe a horror movie with Ethan Hawke in it can be. So I think that even as we have this going on in the big budget, there's more room being made for people to create low budget things that capitalize on the power of story, like Laurie was talking about. So that's still there, and if you do it well enough, you can go on to become a franchise in and of yourself, like The Purge.
Okay, briefly, because I know there's more questions. So movies like this are just the death spiral of Hollywood. It's like the kind of, you know that scene in a movie where the robot's going down, it just repeats. That's what that is. It's not anything to do with fan fiction. It's just a dying industry trying to go back and dredge the last bit out of old formulas. All the interesting stuff is happening in episodic narrative television and other things like that. It's the premier narrative format of our age. I wouldn't worry about all that bullshit as much, because it's not like movies aren't where stories are being made in an original way right now. It hasn't been the case for 5 years more. So, yeah. But occasionally you will get Mad Max Fury Road, which...
I actually really disagree, because I also think that you get an enormous amount of filmmakers who now have the capability that if, let's say, John Cassavetes was alive today, he would be shooting movies on iPhone for $10,000 or $100,000. Like Tangerine is a great example. You can see it on Netflix, but there's so many more. It's just that the traditional ways of doing it are getting circumvented, and now companies like, for example, Netflix are looking at those kind of movies made for $100,000, and they're going, oh, this is an amazing way of getting all these people interested in these new cool movies that are coming out that have new approaches to narrative out. There is stuff being done in all of these forms. The mainstream, I think, has always been strangely ossified, and that's just probably a part of it, and it's probably a part of it that provokes us to make stuff that isn't. And that's cool.
Is this working? It is.
Yes.
So this is coming off what Laurie said about how the Harry Potter generations are becoming the new sort of grown-up published authors. And I'm wondering, I think this is a really big question, what happens when someone is running for MP or to for senator when they have like 30,000 tweets that you can find dirt in. And I think the question that I've been asking myself for a long time is there a good enough PR team that we will be able to get a furry into the White House?
Oh. You'd have to have like a basket in the Oval Office. That'd be so lovely. I really hope so. I don't know. I don't know. I have anything clever to say in response to that. I think the way that we form, like, I think, like, you're kind of seeing fan fiction as somebody's dirty history as well, and it is kind of a bit. But I think there are now. What's interesting is there are now a lot of authors out there who will point to their old fan fiction and say, "Hey, that was me when I was like Cassandra Clare, who is just one of the most popular YA authors out there, and she's doing brilliant stuff. Her stuff has been made into movies, and I still know Cassie Clare as the author of the very secret Lord of the Rings diaries. Did anybody ever read that? Yeah. Sam will kill him if he tries anything. Bubble baths? Yeah? No? Still not king? No. Okay, this is like old internet retro speak. But yeah, I think it's maybe not the White House, but certainly I don't think it's going to be a shameful thing for a long time. Anybody else?
It isn't right now. I mean, Donald Trump's entire tweet history. I mean, it's like there's no real reason to think that anyone's, you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Trevor Noah. I feel like we're all becoming much more comfortable with this idea that, you know, we all have pasts and they can surface in really strange ways. But it does seem, I don't know, it feels like to me like we're getting really comfortable with, like one of my favorite New Yorker writers recently Instagrammed a picture of herself drinking it like out of a beer bong, and I was sort of like, cool. Like I just think we're getting much more comfortable with this idea that there is this sort of universality of human experiences, and part of it's going to be really embarrassing things online. But I just feel like the current electoral process is like, there's no evidence that anything shameful in your past will at all deter you from being possibly elected president right now. So it's very strange to me, but it's exciting. I think that's an exciting development, albeit current president candidates or potential candidates aside.
That's a lovely note to I think that we could end on. Yeah. No, I know. I really mean that.
We're about to elect 4chan to the White House.
Yeah.
Imminently. Well, you guys are.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. So first I want to thank the panel. A round of applause to the panel. And right before we go, I just want to say that we did have one or two questions on the Twitter account, and because we didn't get too many questions, I would hope that you just invite the panel to go check out hashtag K3 and maybe try to answer some of those questions that we got from people on the live stream. And then also, just because it's on brand for this panel, I don't think we mentioned two committee members that are not here with us IRL. One is a science fiction author, Sarah Weincheck. She's here with us in spirit, especially in this panel. And we also have Imp Kerr, who has did the pins, the program, everything, just about everything visual for the conference. Wouldn't be the same without his aesthetic. So thank you again, and now for our last panel. Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Calling next panel to the stage. Next panel to the stage.